something just happened, and it's raising serious questions. A post goes up, perfectly timed, carefully crafted, and then suddenly, it's gone. No explanation, no warning, just deleted. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This all happened right after a strong public response to claims that haven't even fully come out yet. So now people are asking, was that post a message, a distraction, or something that wasn't supposed to stay up for long? Because once you connect the timing, the reaction, and the sudden silence, the story starts to look very different. Something shifted and people felt it instantly, not slowly, not over time, but all at once, like a moment you cannot take back, because right when everyone thought things might calm down, something unexpected happened, and it was subtle, almost too subtle to notice at first. A post appeared calm, quiet, perfectly curated, the kind of post that feels intentional without saying anything directly, soft lighting, carefully placed objects, a message that seemed peaceful on the surface, but underneath it carried a different kind of weight, and before anyone could fully understand what it meant, it disappeared completely, no explanation, no follow-up, just gone. And that is where everything changed, because in today's world, things do not just disappear without reason, especially not when every move is watched closely and every detail is analyzed, and the timing made it impossible to ignore, because this happened right after a strong public response to claims that had not even fully reached the public yet, which raises the question, why respond so quickly, why react before the full story is even out there, and more importantly, why follow that response with something so carefully crafted only to remove it hours later? And this is where the curiosity loop begins, because the more you look at it, the more it feels like something bigger is happening behind the scenes, something controlled, something calculated, but not perfectly executed, and that imperfection is exactly what people are noticing now. Because when a narrative starts to build like this, it is no longer just about what is said, it becomes about what is done, and how it is done, and people are paying attention to every detail, the wording, the timing, the tone, even the silence that follows. And what makes this situation even more intense is that the reaction came before the moment fully arrived, which for many observers signals urgency, not calm, not distance, but urgency, and in a media environment where perception moves faster than facts. That kind of urgency can change everything, and suddenly what might have been ignored becomes the center of attention, because responding early can sometimes amplify the very thing you are trying to quiet, and that is exactly what many are starting to question now. Whether the response itself created more momentum than the original claims, and this is where the tension builds even further, because now it is not just about the claims, it is about the reaction to the claims, and that reaction is being replayed, analyzed, and interpreted in real time across platforms, with every new opinion adding another layer to the story, and every layer making it harder to step away from it. And then comes the part that truly holds attention, because patterns begin to form, and once people start seeing patterns, they do not stop looking for them. And what they are seeing right now is a sequence that feels connected, a strong denial followed by a symbolic message, followed by silence and removal, and whether intentional or not, that sequence creates a narrative of its own, one that people are now trying to decode step by step, and the more they try to understand it, the deeper they go, because each action leads to another question, and each question keeps the story alive longer than expected. And this is where the loop tightens, because now every future move becomes part of the same storyline. Every statement, every appearance, every decision is no longer isolated, it is connected to what already happened, and that connection is what keeps viewers watching, because they want to see what comes next. They want to see if the pattern continues or breaks, and that anticipation is what drives retention, because the story no longer feels finished, it feels like it is still unfolding in real time. Now everything comes down to control and timing, because in moments like this, the biggest challenge is not speaking, it is knowing when not to speak, because sometimes stepping in adds fuel while stepping back creates space, and right now the balance between those two is what everyone is watching closely, because the more controlled something appears, the more noticeable any sudden change becomes, and that is exactly why the deletion of that post has become such a focal point, not because of what it showed, but because of what it suggests, and what it suggests is still being debated and interpreted from multiple angles, and that ongoing interpretation is what keeps the story alive, because as long as people are asking questions, the narrative continues, and the moment those questions stop, the story fades. But right now, the questions are only increasing, and that means the attention is not going anywhere anytime soon. At the center of all of this is not just a single post or a single response, but a growing conversation about timing, perception, and control in a world where every move is instantly visible and endlessly discussed. What started as a small moment has expanded into something much larger, because people are no longer just reacting to what they see, they are trying to understand what it means, and that shift from reaction to interpretation is what gives a story real staying power. This situation highlights how quickly narratives can evolve, especially when actions and reactions happen so close together, because in that space, even the smallest detail can take on a much bigger meaning, and once that meaning begins to spread, it becomes difficult to contain or redirect completely, and that is exactly where things stand now. A moment that might have passed quietly has instead become a focal point for discussion, analysis, and speculation. Moving forward, the focus will not just be on what is said, but on how it is handled, because every choice from here carries weight, whether it is a response, a pause, or a completely new direction, and the outcome will depend on how those choices are perceived rather than just what they are. One thing is clear: the attention is still there, the questions are still being asked, and the story is still developing, and as long as that continues, people will keep watching closely, waiting to see what happens next. As everything continues to unfold, one thing is becoming impossible to ignore. This situation has moved far beyond a single post, a single response, or even a single moment. It has evolved into something much bigger, something shaped not just by actions, but by how those actions are perceived in real time. In today's fast-moving digital world, perception often travels faster than facts, and once a narrative begins to take hold, it becomes incredibly difficult to control or reverse. What makes this moment especially significant is the timing of everything. The response came early, before the full story had even reached the public. The message that followed felt carefully crafted, almost symbolic. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, it disappeared. That sequence alone has created a chain reaction of curiosity, analysis, and ongoing discussion. People are no longer just observing, they are actively interpreting, connecting dots, and forming their own conclusions. And that is where the real challenge begins. Because once the audience starts asking questions, the focus shifts. It is no longer just about what is being said, but why it is being said, when it is being said, and what might be happening behind the scenes. Every move becomes part of a larger story, and every decision carries more weight than before. Even silence becomes meaningful, sometimes even louder than words. At the same time, the pressure of constant visibility cannot be underestimated. Every statement, every post, every small adjustment is instantly amplified across platforms, discussed from multiple angles, and replayed again and again. In that kind of environment, maintaining control over a narrative becomes increasingly complex. The more effort that goes into managing perception, the more noticeable those efforts can become to the audience watching closely. There is also a growing awareness among viewers that patterns matter. When actions begin to follow a certain rhythm, a response, followed by a message, followed by a sudden change, people naturally start to look for meaning within that pattern. Whether intentional or not, those patterns can shape how the entire situation is understood. And once that interpretation takes hold, it can influence how every future move is received. What we are seeing now is not just a reaction to a specific claim or event, but a reflection of how modern storytelling works in real time. The audience is no longer passive. They're engaged, observant, and constantly analyzing. They notice the details, the shifts in tone, the changes in direction. And because of that, even the smallest moment, like a post that appears and disappears, can become a central piece of a much larger narrative. Looking ahead, the path forward becomes a careful balancing act. Knowing when to respond and when to step back may be more important than ever. Because in situations like this, over-explaining can sometimes extend the story, while silence can either calm it down or add even more intrigue. The outcome depends not just on the actions taken, but on how those actions are interpreted by an audience that is already paying very close attention. In the end, this moment serves as a powerful reminder of how quickly things can escalate and how difficult it can be to regain control once a narrative starts to grow on its own. What began as a single action has now turned into an ongoing conversation, one that continues to evolve with every new development. And right now, the biggest question isn't just what happened. It's what happens next.